Hey everyone, I've taken several tutorials online where you are doing CRUD operations in .NET Core, and so CRUD create, read, update, delete, and these tutorials have been sometimes 6, 8, 10 hours long, and so I kind of saw an opportunity to try and condense these tutorials down. I made it in 3.5 hours, and so I've taken different a different approach, which is a what I would call a minimum viable project, MVP. Basically, what is a minimal amount of code to do CRUD operations in .NET Core with separate front ends and back ends. And so this architecture, as I'm going to talk about, is a little bit different. We've got Blazor on the front end, and we've got a RESTful API on the back end. And to do these CRUD operations, you can kind of see my home screen where you can add new movies. Right, so here, this has been added to a database, right? This isn't persisting just in my computer's memory. Of course, this is being persisted in a database and in those database tables. So adding new movies, editing movies, reading movies. So here we're performing a read operation, reading all the movies onto the page. Of course, this is all built in Bootstrap, so we've got some Bootstrap components and a Bootstrap modal to delete this movie. And so we've got working CRUD operations. This is a code along, again, with a RESTful API backend and Blazor on the front end. So what you will learn in this tutorial, if you decide to code along, is how to work with .NET Core with a decoupled architecture. So we are going to separate those concerns. We're going to have two different applications that allow you to really focus on, am I a back-end developer? Do I want to work on these RESTful APIs on the back end, and front-end developers can work on Blazor on the front end, versus MVC, where all of that's MVC is a more traditional server-side framework where everything is all bundled together in one place. This decoupled architecture is really, a more modernized approach, whereas MVC's probably been around, I don't want to say since the 60s or the 70s. So model view controller is traditional, lots of software out there built in that pattern. A slightly more modern approach to have this decoupled architecture. Again, we're going to have a RESTful API first development, so that'll be one of the first things we do in this tutorial. And .NET Blazor is kind of Microsoft's response, in my view, to React and Angular. And so these single page applications that are really fast, really snappy, that look really interactive and quick to the end user. So that's what we will be building. We will be using Entity Framework in ASP.NET along with Microsoft SQL Server Local DB. And so you will learn about a little bit about Entity Framework and how to tie in those C# classes into database tables using Entity Framework. Again, the big thing here is we're working with separate front ends and separate back ends. We're going to get into some Bootstrap, so you'll use the Bootstrap for mobile responsiveness, and we're going to do, of course, some data validation to make sure that our data is valid, that we're working within that database. We're going to do data validation in both the front end as well as the back end. Now, who this tutorial is for? This tutorial is geared towards basically newbies to ASP.NET Core. This is a code along. So the more you know about HTML, the more you know about CSS and JavaScript, it will help. However, you don't really technically have to know anything in order to just follow along and learn as you go. I'm a big believer in learning by doing, and this tutorial is just that. You will learn by doing, building that minimum viable MVB, minimum viable project. If you've been introduced to HTML and CSS, that will only help. If you've been introduced to C#, of course, ASP.NET is built on top of these technologies. So the more you know about these technologies, of course, the more it will help you. But again, it is a code along. So technically, you don't have to know anything to kind of get into this. So that's who it's geared for. That's what we're building. I hope you enjoy. Stick around, leave a comment if you enjoyed. Thank you. Here we go. Let's go ahead and get started building our web API backend for our movies full stack web application. Now, what we're using in this entire tutorial, as anyone in the .NET world is familiar with, is Visual Studio Community. And so you go ahead and hit this URL on Microsoft's website, download the installer, install the installer. Of course, the installer will give you an icon like this, Visual Studio Setup.exe. When you run Visual Studio Setup.exe, you're going to be asked what packages do you want to install. What we need is this first one in the upper left, ASP.NET and web development. That'll have everything in it that you need. So those are the tools that are needed to follow along on this tutorial. So once you have installed Visual Studio Community 2022 with that particular package, go ahead and boot it up. And your screen might look a little different than mine since I've launched this a bunch of times. But what you need to do is create a new project. And so we're looking to create a new project. And this is going to be put on my desktop. And so let me go ahead on my desktop, create a new folder, and I'll call this Full Stack Movie Web App. Just a nice full stack. We'll just call it Full Stack Movies. And it doesn't matter the folder name, but this is what we're going to name it here. Of course, everything is a identifier, so that's what we're going to use for our folder name. Not super important. Just give it the place for the code to live. So let's pull this up. We're going to create a new project. Of course, we need to select that folder. Now for the back end, these are filters, right? So we're going to select these filters on these drop-down lists. We're going to select C#, and we're going to select for web. And we can select web API. That might filter it down a little more. This template, the ASP.NET Core Web API, I think gives me a little bit more than what I want to start with. I want to start with this one that says empty. Since we are creating this from scratch, it helps to write everything from scratch. So I'm going to go to just web, and I should be able to find the one, ASP.NET Core empty. So find this one that's labeled as empty. Again, you don't want to start with too much templated code that you didn't write. So this is why we're choosing this. Now where I'm saving it is going to be on my desktop, and there's my full stack movies. So I'm putting it in that folder, and this will be my web, I'll say movies API, to serve up movies out of a database, right? That's ultimately what the API is going to be doing, is using methods to access data out of a database. It's, a lot of times what a movie does is, what an API does is give you access into certain features of an application. So let's name it that. And let's just defaults here, and let's launch it. Let that spin up. Okay. So just to click around a little bit, program CS, very basic, says hello world. When we go to the root folder, we are going to launch hello world. App settings, doesn't have much in it. launch settings.json. Couple things in here that we're going to change up pretty quick inside these launch settings. But let's just boot this up and get it to say hello world. And you can see it does return in a browser hello world. So template is up and running and working fine. Now the API is going to provide access to resources through HTTP. Of course, that's the whole idea here, but the resources are movies. The movies are stored in a database. The database doesn't exist yet. So we're going to use what's called Entity Framework to map entities, be it movies, in C#, C# movies, C# class of movies, to a database. In other words, we got to create a database and we got to put data in the database, and then we're going to use a web API to work with that data in the database. So to work with Entity Framework, let's go ahead and install Entity Framework under Tools, NuGet Package Manager. And let's browse, and I'll type this here. This is in my search history. Microsoft dot Entity Framework Core dot tools. So we need to install the tools for Entity Framework Core and wait for that to get a green check mark right here. Let's clear that out and search for the next package, which is Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server. Now, a lot of different tutorials use different databases. We are using SQL Server. When you install Visual Studio the way that I showed at the beginning of this video, you install a version of SQL Server called LocalDB. So LocalDB is a version of SQL Server that is free when you download and install the way that we did. So SQL Server is our database of choice, DBMS, right? Database Management System of choice. So let's install SQL Server for Entity Framework Core. And if I go to under installed and kind of refresh here, sometimes it takes a minute. Clear those out and refresh. You can see those two dependencies are installed. Okay, so we have Entity Framework installed, but again, what Entity Framework is going to do is map our entities in C#, be it our movies, to database tables in SQL Server. And so we don't have any entities, we don't have any classes. When you say entities, those are your things, like your classes. So we need to go ahead and right-click, not the solution, but the project. We're going to right-click the project and add a folder called entities. So let's add a new folder. These are our entities, entities. And what we're going to create are two entities. We're going to create a movie class, movie, and there's going to be a one-to-one relationship. A movie is going to have a genre, so we're also going to create a genre class. Add a class called genre, so we could just have two tables, movie table and a genre table. Now there's a lot of kind of magic behind the scenes in Entity Framework that I will explain a little bit as I go through. The first is when you have an int called ID, now again, this is called an auto-implemented property. Okay, this is the ID of the movie, ID 1, 2, 3. A lot of times you can have a globally unique identifier, or what would be called a GUID. When you're using this identifier for your auto-implemented property, it is automatically going to be a primary key, and it's automatically going to be, the first movie is going to start with 1 and increment to 2 and 3 and so on and so forth. So this is your primary key. again, the entity framework maps these classes and it has to create tables in our database. So it could be ID, and it could technically be ID. Of course, the convention is capital I, or it could be movie ID. But in this case, our class is called movie. So ID, we're just going to, it's assumed that it's a movie ID when it's inside of a class of movie. So that'll work for us. Our movie is going to have a name, public. I'm going to mark it as required for some data validation. String called name, so our movie name. Eventually we're going to do some data validation, which is where that required is going to come into play. There are other attributes. This is a required attribute that is inside of this data annotation. So again, required attribute is going to enforce some of our data validation. So we're going to mark it as required here. It brings in line 1, the data annotations up at the top. And maybe, hey, our name has to be a maximum length of, let's just say 40 characters for some data validation. Let's make a price, data type of decimal. And our price can be a range of $1 to $100. And we will also mark this as required. And last, we will have a release date. Public date only data type called release date. Now our genre class is simply going to have an ID and a name. I'll mark this as required to get rid of the green squiggly. Okay. To say that, hey, if we're going to add a genre, we have to have a name. And now that we have the genre class kind of filled out, we want to create a relationship between genre and movie. This is going to be done with a navigation property and a foreign key property. And so navigation property is going to be a public genre, nullable genre called genre. And on these navigation properties, we're going to add a validate never. Because what we're going to do is we're going to validate the genre ID. We don't need to make sure that there's a genre object. As long as we have a genre ID, that's really what a movie will need. We don't need a full genre object. So if you leave that off, that would cause a lot of unintended validation errors I've seen. So we're going to say validate never on that. And then what we will do is have a public int genre ID. Now this is a foreign key property that is actually going to link to the genre ID table. So this is what's needed to create a relationship between the two entities, movie and genre. And this is a one-to-one relationship. One movie has one genre. One-to-one relationships oftentimes could just be left off. Like we could just make this genre a string, but it's very normal to have relationships between tables, and there's all kinds of relationships like one-to-one. And so why not demonstrate a one-to-one relationship here? Now we have our genre and we're movie. Now we are ready to actually create our database. Because again, Entity Framework needs entities to map to our database tables. So there's a couple of places that we need to write some code in, and app settings is one of them. In app settings, what we need to do is define what's called a connection string. A connection string has the settings necessary to connect to a database. And so I'm going to copy this code over, and the main reason I'm copying it is because well, there's a lot here, and there's a lot of room for typos. And so my recommendation to anyone following along is to make sure that you don't have typos if you are following my code example. And so double check yourself. And so here what I've done is inside of my app settings file, which it kind of is what it sounds like. These are settings for your application. That is a JSON file, right? JavaScript object notation. So we have property : value, property : value. So the connection string property has a value of an object. That object has a movie database DB connection string. So I have a connection string called movie DBCS, right? So we're creating a connection string here, and that connection string's values are inside of this string here, inside of here. And what these settings say is, hey, use local DB. To make sure that you have this installed, if you click on View SQL Server Object Explorer, you'll actually see SQL Server local DB right here, MS SQL local DB, right? This is my version of SQL Server. These are different instances of SQL Server, but this is one of my instances. And then under here, these are where my databases exist. Okay, now I'm just going to call this my movie DB, right? So you get to name your database right here in your connection string. So my movie DB is the name of my entire database that will have my tables. Okay, we say trusted connection and multiple active result sets is true. This creates the connection string for us to use. So type that out, don't make a typo, double check your work. Okay, close app settings now. And back to program CS. We need to tell program CS to use our connection string inside of app settings. So here's use connection string from app settings.json. There's one more thing that's needed here, and as I code this out, we'll see it. So what are these lines doing? This is creating a variable, right, var called builder, that is of type web application. Of course, web application is the data type that is allowing us to create our web API. Okay, so this is the data type. Data type is web application. It's a web server, right? We're starting up a web server and we're calling it builder. When we call the build method here, we're storing that inside of a variable called app. So app essentially is our web application that is a web server. Okay, it's functioning as a web server, and when you go to the root, it returns hello world. Okay, and then we're running our web application. So this file isn't doing a whole lot. It's creating a variable that is of type web application and running that web application. So we are going to add to our web application a little dependency injection, and I'm going to explain this. Add db context. So we're going to add a context file called movie context. Now this data type does not, we haven't created this, so that's going to be a red squiggly for now. Options arrow, and options use SQL Server, builder configuration, get connection string. Okay, now this movie context. Now a couple things here. What's the name of our connection string? Well, it's not default connection. We named our connection string movie DBCS. So I'm going to copy that name, movie DBCS, and paste it right there. And the reason this is erroring out is we're just missing a using statement up at the top. And so show potential fixes, if you hover over this and it says, hey, let's bring in Entity Framework Core up at the top, that resolves that issue. However, it still doesn't know what movie context is. Movie context is going to be the file that we create that will allow us to interact with our database. And so we need to create this file, and it's going to act as the kind of the database layer from the web application to contact the database. We're going to work with this movie context file. And so I'm going to put this inside of a new folder called data. I'm going to add a folder called data. Inside that data, I'm going to add a class called movie context. And I'm going to have to import this using statement. So now it's at least a recognized type. Okay, but we need to finish coding this class. This movie's context needs to be coded a very specific way. And so here, I'll do this a long way and then I'll show the shortcut. Let's go ahead and build the constructor. Public movie context. Okay, so you don't have to code this because I'm going to shortcut this. Movie context, you do need to code this, right? Movie context inherits from DB context. And we need to add a using statement up at the top to bring in Entity Framework Core again. So if I kind of hover this, error, or I'll just type this out, using Microsoft.Entity Framework Core. Okay, now everything's happy. Basically, there's a shorthand for this. And so what is this? This is a class called movie context. And this is the constructor for the movie context class. In this constructor, it takes in a data type of context options, variable identifiers options, and it passes that up to the parent constructor, which is DB context. All this to say that this is a whole lot of code that doesn't do anything besides when you construct an object, it passes that variable up to the parent. And there's a shorter hand way, pretty cool, I think, of called a primary constructor that shorthands this. Let's see if you kind of control dot this. It says use the primary constructor. There we go. Now this is a shorthand for doing the same thing, right? We're inheriting from DB context. We're taking in the options. Kind of interesting on the class, I now have parentheses, and then passing those options up to the parent. So that's kind of cool, shorthand for that. Okay, so this, again, this movie context is going to be used to interact with our database. So the next thing we do is we create our tables. And the way that we create our database tables is with DB set of type movie. Now we have to have a using statement for using movies. Movies API dot entities is where we put our entities. You could also call these entities models. So in the MVC world, they're called models nonetheless. Here we have a table called movies that are individual rows are of the class movies. So all the rows are individual movies. The table is called movies plural. That makes sense. Let's also create one called genre, public DB set called genre. So these are our two movies, again, our two tables. There should be a one-to-one relationship here between these two. And the next thing to do, and again, I'm going to copy and paste on this because I'm going to add seed data. So I'm going to say protected override. and on model creating. So this method, this third one right here, on model creating, this is going to be the method to seed data into our database. And so if our database hasn't been created or has been deleted or dropped, this is going to kind of be the initial data that we're going to use. And because movies rely on genres, we have to seed our genres first. The way that we're going to do that is with a has data method. So here for the genre table, we're saying the genre table has data, and we're seeding the genre IDs of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the movie genres: action, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, romance. Your mileage, you can play with this however you want to seed genres, whatever genres you want, of course, totally fine. Now we need to actually add some movies. And, you know, again, I don't think these release dates are all that accurate because everything is January 1st and then whatever year. So the data is not valid, but the example is valid. So just some good movies here, right? Inception, Dark Knight, Interstellar, Matrix, and Lord of the Rings. So we've got 6 movies. Now the important part here is that each movie has a genre ID, right? So genre ID of 1. So Inception is action, sure. Dark Knight is also action, sure. Interstellar is sci-fi, even though a lot of people say it's a lot of good science in there. Yeah, definitely sci-fi. Matrix, sci-fi, sure. Lord of the Rings, genre ID of 3. Fantasy, okay, those are mostly accurate, even though the release dates may not be. Another thing to point out, since our price is a decimal, remember that you need to put that letter M there. Otherwise, you get some data type mismatch, and so you got a decimal on the left, a float on the right, and you could lose precision there. So we don't want to do that. So we want to tell the compiler that we know what we're doing. So we put the letter M on our 1299, saying that it is a decimal. Let's go ahead and, as I get these hot reloads, rebuild and apply changes, always, I'm good with that. This little command prompt window down here is showing me that my program is still running. Okay, almost there. The web server is no longer running, and that's fine. Let me just close all these windows. We're almost there, but we need to write, I'm going to write a way to, let's see, after builder.build, actually, I'm going to take this connection string because the order of operations matter here. After, I'm going to define this here, my movie context, and then I'm going to say builder.build. Okay, not putting these in the right order can make a difference, and anyone that's worked with middleware in the past can verify that statement. And so after app, after we declare this variable app, I'm going to asynchronously see data into our database. And so when we're operating in an asynchronous mode, it's just a more efficient way of operating than synchronously. So by default, we could seed this data synchronously. This is going to be a slightly more efficient way. So I'm going to say using var scope. Okay, create scope, var services, scope, service provider, try, var context equals services, get required service, movie context, and we are going to await context, database, migrate async. And if not, we're going to just console log in an exception, string interpolation, an error has occurred while migrating the database with the message, capital L, console write line is our method. Right line. Okay, so this will cause the migration to run, and let's save it, and I'm going to put in a breakpoint just to stop the code at that point, and I'll step over it, step over, and I'll just hit continue at this point. And everything's building, application's up and running. So let's go ahead and click stop, go back to my Object Explorer, refresh my databases, and see my movie DB is in fact there. That was not there before, of course. And the tables are not there. Let me look. Makes sense. It creates a database. To actually get the tables there, we will add a migration. And so add migration is necessary, called initial. All right, this will actually create the table. Ha ha ha. Create the table called genres, create the table called movies. There we go. Insert the data into our tables, and to run this migration, of course, update -database. It doesn't like the length of my movie title, so I'm going to go into my movie entity and I'm going to increase the string length to 50 characters. So now I can update the database and it can insert that long title. This is going to require me to create another migration. So I'm going to delete the migration folder and all of its content. Now run the add migration command init again, and now we can update the database. Voila. Refresh. Databases, my movie DB, tables, movies, view the data. There's our movies. There are our genres. So we've been able to create the database, insert the table, and now we're ready to make our web API. So I'm going to take 2 minutes or less, and I'm going to cover RESTful API principles. The reason for this is what we're creating. We're creating what's called a RESTful API. REST stands for Representational State Transfer over HTTP. So we're using HTTP to send data, requests, and data back and forth. Statelessness just means that every time a client makes a request, the server then forgets about the client unless you use some sort of login persisting like cookies. But by default, HTTP is stateless. And what you're doing is you are requesting, it's hard to do this in 2 minutes, you're requesting a resource like data out of a database via URIs. So you're going to give a URIs URLs. You're going to basically add an address. You're going to make a request for a resource. Those types of requests can fall in these categories. You can ask for a get some data. You can add new data with a post. You can update data with a put, or you could delete data, known as CRUD operations, using HTTP verbs, these methods. RESTful, still got 40 seconds. RESTful APIs send back status code saying that worked, or there was a client error, you didn't give me a good URI, or there was a server error, the server crashed, right? These are status codes, categories, right? 200, 400, 500, and the like. You use certain nouns to represent resources. So /users says give me all your users instead of /get users. So there's some convention to your URLs. /users user ID is a hierarchy for URIs. And then you want to use different technologies again, like cookies, JSON web tokens, API keys to do things like authorization. I did a decent job. It was right around 2 minutes. So these are RESTful API principles. These are the principles that we're going to be doing when we're coding our RESTful API. Now, because we don't want to bog down our program CS with too much C# in one place, of course you want to separate this part out, these what are referred to as endpoints. So I am going to add a new folder in Solution Explorer called Endpoints. So right click the project, add a folder, Endpoints. And I'm going to start with a new class, add a class called Movies Endpoints. And my movies endpoints is going to have an extension method. Okay, now an extension method is a way to add a method to a class. And so I kind of touched on this class back here that is the web application class, and we are going to be adding a static method to the web application class. So let's take a look how to code this. Public static route group builder map movies endpoints. This, now the keyword this is how you know you are writing an extension method. The class that we are extending is web application, and our variable identifier will be called app. Okay, so let's do var group app map group movies. Actually, hold on. Before I do that, that's getting ahead of myself. I'm gonna do app.map get to the root /movies. So when I go to the root URL /movies, what am I going to return? I'm going to return an async movie context. So now movie context, I need to bring in the using movie API data. That's where movie context is. Movie context called movie context, and this will return await movie context dot movies, include the movie's genre, to lists async. This is a database method call. Now, for this static method, this needs to be inside of a static class. So that cleans that up. And let's return, I think I need to return app. Okay, I think I do need my group in here. You see my return data type is route group builder. So to kind of shorthand this slash movies, we're going to do var group equals app dot map group movies. And then this becomes group dot map get, and this returns group. Okay, now that makes that happy. So this is no longer here. This is going to become, okay, so what did we just do here? Instead of having to say slash movies every single time, we kind of added that movies prefix in this group variable. And so slash movies is actually how you get to this point right here. And so save that. And now all we need to do is add this movies endpoint in our program CS. So let's go back to program CS and let's do app dot map movies endpoints. That its static method is now available, right? Because we extended this web application class. So we can now call that. So that should be accessible. And now we need to actually test it to make sure that our data comes back. So to test it, we can use a couple things. So first of all, let's boot this up and let's take a look at something here. This browser is going to pop up. I want to point out the port 7027. So I'm very used to using Postman. If you use Postman to send requests, but if I do slash movies, well, there we go. We can get the data back in the browser, and everything is working as anticipated. Now, you know, to use Postman, that would be a better tool. Also, you know, instead of using a browser, because as we start doing like add a new movie or edit a movie, you can't really use a browser without a GUI. These other tools like Postman can, right, add new movies without a GUI. So Visual Studio has an actual way of doing this. This is newer to me. You can make a new file that the file extension is .http, and I couldn't find it for the life of me. If I add a new item, I'm going to make a file with an HTTP extension. And man, there's just .http. Let's see if that. So I did this code file. Again, I can kind of scroll through all of these, and I couldn't find it. So here's what I'll do. I'll right click and I'll say add. Okay, and what I'll just I'll delete this. I'm going to add quotes around this file name because I know that works well at the command line. And I'm going to call this my main.http. I'm just going to try that. Okay, it doesn't like my quotes. So let me get rid of the quotes. Let me just add that. And it wants to just have, let me go to my solution. Okay, it does have the right icon next to it once I deleted that. So I'm going to run a GET request. What was that URL? Again, if I pop this open, it's localhost 7027. And it should be going across both HTTP and HTTPS. And I'll explain that. Okay, so here, if I save this and hit send request, I should get back hello world. which is good. So again, this is for testing purposes. And if I do /movies and I save that file, there, now we're getting the data back in Visual Studio. So this is how we can test our web API, getting data out of the database via a URI. URI is a type of URL, or the other way around. And yeah, everything's working. So, well, we need a few more operations. We need to update a movie, we need to delete a movie, and we need to add a new movie. So that's done at these endpoints, and that's what we'll do next. Okay, so just for my own sanity, I'm going to say this is when you get /movies. Another thing we can do is get a movie by ID. And so let's code get movie by ID. Again, we're still inside of the method, the static method, map movies endpoint. So I'm going to say group dot map get / variable ID, comma, async method, outside of the quote, async method. Okay, so I want to talk about this piece right here, movie context. Earlier I said dependency injection. Okay, and I'm going to go back to my program CS and talk about this line right here, which enables dependency injection of our movie context class. This whole idea, of being object-oriented, C#'s an object-oriented language means, you make classes and you construct those classes. And what's interesting about MovieDB context is you'll notice I never construct this class. When you have dependency injection here, the class is constructed for you by this services container. And then that class is able to be passed into your methods. And so if I go to my movies endpoints, notice this method receives an object of movie context. That's what dependency injection is. It kind of constructs the objects when the application starts, so that these objects can be passed into methods at different points. And so that's kind of a nice feature. You don't actually have to instantiate movie context. You just pass it into your method. And so we're doing the same thing here. We're passing in a movie context into this get movie by ID method, endpoint, if you will. And this one takes another parameter, obviously the ID, which we're passing in as part of the route. This is a route variable, right? So we're going to accept in this ID into this method. So it's passed in via the URL. That number passed in via the URL is passed into the method. And then we're able to hit our link query with a little lambda expression to get the first X, which X is a movie, where the movie's ID equals the ID that's passed in. And include that movie's genre. So if I save that movie endpoint, I go back to my HTTP file to write another, put 3 pounds here. We're going to say get https / localhost 7027 movies 1. If I send that request, let's double check my work. Movies endpoint map get. Now, sometimes it's not able to hot reload, so you actually have to shut it down and reboot. Sometimes if the changes that you made are significant enough. It's not able to hot reload some of these changes. So we got back to the hello world. I'm going to show you, I don't need that web browser popping up every time. Back to my endpoints here. Now I get all the movies, and then here is get movie by ID of 1, ID of 2. We can get a single movie at a time. It's sending back a status code of 200 OK. Let's see if a movie that doesn't exist, it sends back null. Of course, we might want to account for that. Or we might not right now, just doing a minimum viable project. Here's how we can change our movie's endpoint. So instead of returning this, I'll return, let's go ahead and write the method out a little bit. And let's store a movie. Let's import using the entities. So up at the top, we're going to add using entities. Let's add our semicolon back in. And then what I can say is return movie. Is the movie null? If so, results not found. Otherwise, results okay movie. And I've got one extra. Where is that being closed? Let me fix my curly braces. I'm off by one. I'm sure you see it. Okay, I found it. I'm just missing my parenthesis and semicolon at the end to close the get method. And this capital M needs to be a lowercase m. So we have a ternary operator, right? The if-else kind of shorthand. If the movie is null, return not found. Otherwise, send it back with the status code of 200 of OK. Now if I build that, reboot it as I just did, and I send the request, now we got a 404 not found, which is what I would expect. And if I send the request of 3, we get the data back. Okay, so that's a quick fix on how to get a movie by ID. Let's add a new movie, and with this we will do a little bit of data validation. Let me click this arrow to collapse that method, and let's post two movies. This is group.map_post, and this is just if I have a post method at the /movies async So we're going to pass in the new movie itself and a movie context. Okay. And this is just going to straight add the movies in. So we're running an add method on our movie context. We're going to save the changes. I want to also say new movie dot genre, which is that navigation property. We're going to set the new movie's genre when we're going to basically hit the genres table and pull that genre out of the database. And so we're going to store the genre as part of that object, add a new movie, save changes async, and then we're going to return a success message here. I'm going to put a breakpoint in right here. And so when I go to add a post, this is going to be a little different because we have to send an object in with it. Now, in order for this object to be sent over, we need to add this little extra content type application JSON. Okay, so adding this line, I believe this space is required. Let's test that, but nonetheless, let's fill this out with a name that exists. We'll just call it the matrix 3. A price 30. And a year, this was a date only, I believe, was called release date, colon, 2003-03-31. Just making that up. Okay, so let's launch this. Name, price, and release date. And that was our first breakpoint. We can just hit continue through that one. Okay, we got the hello world booting up. If we go to main HTTP, I send this request. It did hit my breakpoint, so it hit my route. Let's step over that call. Now if I hover new movie, just want to make sure that it does have a genre. It does not. That's kind of what I wondered about. So the genre ID is not coming over. Oh, well, I don't have a genre ID. So let me go back here. Stop. That's why we're troubleshooting. Let's do comma genre ID colon and action. Let me go back to my seed data. We said that the matrix is a genre ID of 2. So let's go back here. Genre ID of a 2. And if I Control S save and send that request again, okay, let's again, sometimes enough changes are made, so I'll stop, reboot. Need to take that breakpoint out now that we're not troubleshooting that. And hit my next breakpoint, step over, new movie, now has a genre. That genre is 2, name of sci-fi. That looks good. Let's add the new movie. Step over, continue. And we're in break mode, so I don't think, oh, there it is. It says sends back ID of 7, the matrix 3, release date, and the like. Now if I send request, we now have the matrix 3 in the last one. Now, this is saved in our database, of course. So if I stop this and relaunch it, not just saved in memory, let's stop, take that breakpoint out. And I'm also going to take this breakpoint out and just run without debugging. And send my request. Of course, this is saved in the database, not just memory. So there, you can verify that there. Of course, in Object Explorer, if I go to movies, view data, not view permissions, we might need to refresh this. Let me close, stop. My movie database, refresh, refresh. Sometimes you go a little too fast. There it is, Matrix 3. $30, genre ID of 2. And the computer caught up with me. There we go. So that's adding a new movie. Now, you should not be able to just leave a name off. Name should be required. So there's a neat little dependency that we can add, that we will do that now, so that we're not going to allow people to add empty movies kind of thing. Okay, so we're going back to NuGet Package Manager, and we're going to browse for minimal APIs.extensions. This one right here. A set of extensions and helpers for working with ASP.NET Core minimal APIs. Again, this is going to help us do some data validation. Think of Joy in the JavaScript world is one of those dependencies that can allow us to do some back-end data validation on the server. Okay, so we have minimal APIs.extensions enabled. And all we should have to do to get this to enforce our data validation from our entities, right? Because movies, you know, we had these different required fields, is to go back into our movies endpoints. And here on this line right here, this will add validation on all of our subsequent methods. We're going to call with parameter validation. And with that, if I go back to my, boot up my server, go back here, send the request, and I'm just going to try and leave the name off and send that request. There we get an error. New movie was missing required properties, including the name. So let's bring the name back, and let's even leave that off here, empty string, and see if it handles the case of empty string. And there we see the name field is required. So this is actually what I was expecting. So you just had to leave that name field as an empty string. Either way, we're getting, whether we're getting this JavaScript object back, the other one was a 400 error. It's not allowing that to happen. So little data validation there, and our post is now working. Let's do an update, and to speed this along, I'm just going to copy and paste. You're going to want to pause the video. I will explain it, right? So you just don't have to watch me type it out. Okay, so I'll give you a nice little screen to pause, and then here comes the explanation. Okay, of course we're doing a put. A put is an update. We're updating a movie. Into our route, we're accepting the ID, which is coming in via the URL, again, a route parameter. A movie object, that's the updated movie, and a context variable to hit the database. We're going to go ahead and look up the movie that's in the database. So we have updated movie. That's the movie object that's obviously updated. And then we have the current movie stored as movie. If the movie is null, say, hey, we didn't find the movie, right? You can't, like, the ID of 30 doesn't exist. So we want to say, 30 doesn't exist. And then we basically test all these properties. And we say, hey, if the updated movie has a name, then let's update the movie's name, right? The movie.name equals the updated movie's name, right? And that's basically what we do with all of the properties. If you give it a new genre, right, then set the new movie's genre equal to the updated movie's genre ID, so you can change a genre as well. Same thing here. If the price is not 0, then update the movie's price. If there's a new release date, then update the release date. So basically, if they're sending over some updated information, then update the current movie with that updated information. Then we run an update method against the movie's collection, passing in the movie that has been updated, save the changes, and we send back a results no content, which is a typical way to return you could send the movie back, but it's not a good practice to necessarily do that. So here's results no content if it works. So let's save that. Send in a put https 7027/movies. Let's see, this is running. So we're going to update number 7, right? Update movies/7. And we'll update the price. And so very similar to what we did last time is we're going to put content type and just update the price to $35. So again, we can get a movie by its ID, everything's up and running. I'll make sure I got a put. There's my put. And probably I need to reboot. Again, add a new method. Let's go ahead and reboot. And what I'm going to do, I've waited this long, but nonetheless, I'm going to stop that web browser from popping up. If I go into Properties, Launch Settings, under Profiles, HTTP, Launch Browser, I'm going to change that to false. Launch browser to false under HTTP and HTTPS. I don't need that browser to boot up every time because I'm doing all my testing here in Visual Studio. Okay, things running. Let's close it down. Launch it up one more time. And let's get all the movies. Let's send that request. Bad request. A trailing comma. Can't have that trailing comma. Let's send that request. Did I save it? I didn't save it. Now let's save it and send the request. Okay, so it is not happy because it is still a required name. So I will give it the required name. What else is required on my movie? Because it's not going to be happy about name. I got the price. Okay, so 204 no content is what we told it to return. And if I go back to get all my movies, Matrix 3 now has a price of $35. So update movie is working. So that's my put. Get movies, get movie by ID, add a new movie, update a movie. And again, for speed, trying to make this not a 3-hour tutorial. We are going to do a delete a movie by its ID. And so this method is a map delete by its ID. Take in the ID, take in a movie context. We're going to ask, is there a movie? If it's null, not found. Remove the movie, save the changes, return no content. And that is exactly how you run a delete method. So this is number 7. So this is a 3 pounds. Delete. Localhost 7027 movie 7. Let's send that request. Method not allowed because we got to reboot. Hot reload's only so good. And get all the movies. Matrix 3 is still there, $35. Let's delete it. 204 no content is what we told it to return. By the way, I looked up that 204 no content, and that was like the recommendation. Didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but if you look up 204 error status code 204 actually means no content indicates that a request was successful, but there's no additional information to send back in the response body. So it's like, hey, it worked, but that's all you need to know is that it worked, which I think is useful because there might be things in that object that you don't want to send back to the client. There might be data that you don't want to share back to the client. But generally 200 means successful, so I get it. And there we have it. This is a MVP RESTful API to work with our database SQL server. And now that's what's left is to build that front end with Blazor. So that's coming up next. All right, I am excited to continue this tutorial into the front end using this technology called Blazor. First off, Blazor, name, Razor, pages. Too much similarity. Blazor, Razor, nonetheless. Blazor is a newer technology, as you can see here, released right around COVID. I think March 2020 is when the United States started locking down. Nonetheless, it's an easy date to remember. So it hasn't been around too long. I realize 4 years, depending on how old you are, might seem like a long time, but in the terms of as you get a little older, 4 years kind of comes and goes really quick. So Blazor has not been around that long. So full disclosure, this is my first go at it, giving a tutorial. Now I've taken some tutorials myself. Credit to Free Code Camp. They're great, online resource. And so I'm going to attempt to teach it myself in my teaching style, which is kind of a code-centric, just write the code and teach the theory as you go, learn by doing. in this tutorial. Now, I just want to also point this out that, you got to keep your eye on the popular technologies that are out there. So this is Stack Overflow developer survey. There's about 100,000 developers that always answer these questions every year. So you kind of want to get a feel for trends. And Blazor is picking up speed. It's not nearly as popular as the JavaScript frameworks, but that's its goal. If you kind of see here, I view this as Microsoft's response to React. You obviously React, if you've built in React before, you've built components, you have a good understanding on basically how Blazor is going to work. Blazor works with components, and if you go to Microsoft's website on Blazor, it's like the first thing that you see is that you will be building components with C# instead of components with JavaScript. And so Blazor, to me, seems like a response because, well, let's face it, React is crazy popular because these React apps build these single page applications all in JavaScript, and they're so fast, they're so snappy that you can click around this website built in React and it's like no load time. It's just, you just instant load times in these single page applications. And so you got to go down the list here to find Blazor even way down here at 4 or 5%, just under 5%. So you can kind of see here JavaScript is kind of kicking butt. All these JavaScript frameworks up top. And then here you got ASP.NET Core. So, .NET as a technology is right behind JavaScript. And then, well, this class, at least that I'm teaching right now in the summer of 2024, it's built on .NET Core MVC, which is just a different design pattern than using Blazor for a front end with a separate REST API on the back end. Kind of more of a microservices, just, separation of code. You've got a different code base for the back end, different code base for the front end. And so, I always found this a little interesting, the way that this is going to be built. And, I've built applications like this in JavaScript too, is you're going to have a movies API, right? So right here on my desktop, we went ahead and made this full stack movies, and you have this one folder for the back end, and you're going to have another folder for the front end. Like the front end and the back end are in separate folders. Instead of being in one place, they're kind of in two, which allows you to kind of maintain the code bases separately, right? If you're a back end developer, you can just work on the API. If you're a front end developer, you could just work in Blazor. So that separation of concerns is kind of one of the advantages over MVC, where if you kind of have an MVC app, model views, controllers all in one place, front end, back end, database logic, it's kind of all written in one place. And so, yeah, so this Blazor, now it's 2024, this developer survey is 2023, so my understanding is that Blazor, I'll be really interested to see this 4%. Where is it at in 2024? I think it's going to be trending upwards. Hopefully quite a bit. But nonetheless, in this .NET world, Blazor's kind of the new thing. So why not dabble? And so use the power of .NET and C# to build full stack web apps without writing a line of JavaScript. And so, we kind of will write C#, and I believe the word is transpiled, and so that will be taken from the server, and kind of that C# on the server will be sent down to the client. Of course, C# won't be sent down to the client. It'll be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So you can get that kind of JavaScript type interactivity by writing C#. So if C# is your thing and you love some C#, this is kind of a trendy technology. So what I'm going to do in this particular video is I'm just going to wire up my front end to my back end. We're going to, create the project, and we're going to link the back end to the front end. We're going to pull some data out of the database and kind of do the read operation of the CRUD, because that's going to be a good starting point. I'll come back to that, minimize. So let's go ahead and open up Visual Studio. And I'm going to create a new project. And you can kind of see I've tinkered with some different templates for Blazor. Again, this is, since I'm newer to Blazor, there's kind of different ways, and we can get into these render modes that you can run your C#, whether they're running on the server or they're running on the client, or the server then the client. So there's different ways, and you can see here to get Blazor to run on the client, which seems very advantageous to me, you're using this thing called WebAssembly. However, WebAssembly is also one of the cons of WebAssembly is that it's a decent download for the client. Like it kind of slows things down. So I'm not going to be using WebAssembly, at least in this first tutorial. So anyway, so kind of going back to my templates, there's WebAssembly, there's an empty app, there's a Blazor app. If you just search, again, I kind of have C# filtered and web. There's Blazor web app, standalone app, empty app, server app empty. Where I landed was just using this Blazor web app. And this is kind of like, to me, this seems like the de facto template, and it's going to give you a little bit of code. I wanted to get one of these empty ones to work for me, so it gives me a little less. However, a little bit of templated code, we'll at least walk through it. I'm going to walk through this a little bit slower than I did on the back end. Back end, I just did an empty kind of project. This will help us understand, I think, when I walk through it, how the pieces are all linked together. So I'm going to choose this Blazor web app. And again, I'm going to make sure this is in the right folder. So this is on my desktop. Full Stack Movies is where I'm going to choose this, right? So if I select this folder, notice Full Stack Movies is my root folder. And I'm going to create what I called my backend. It just said Movies API. So I'll just call this Movies Blazor. And that's fine. It created Full Stack Movies / Movies Blazor. It's kind of, if I check this, it kind of gets rid of one extra level there. But I typically don't check that, so I'm going to leave that unchecked. But nonetheless, it's going to be in that desktop Full Stack Movies. I might not need that extra folder, probably don't, but nonetheless, let's create it like that. One thing that's nice about learning MVC is you can learn things about authentication and entity framework, and all of that stuff kind of is portable, right? So if you're in my class currently and you're learning MVC, there's going to be a lot of knowledge that you gain out of the class that is portable over to this Blazor world, including authentication as we get there. Kind of see here, interactivity mode by default is set to none, and we can kind of see here server, WebAssembly, and auto, and those were highlighted in that article that I just had pulled up. But I'm going to keep it the default, and I'll show you how to change that. And then page per component. So basically all defaults. Haven't changed any settings there. And let's create that. I'll pause while this spins. Okay, that completed, and pull it over. As as you kind of saw, well, okay, so there's a subfolder with the solution in it, and the API is the same way. So we're all good there. I'm happy with that folder structure. And if I boot this up, and we got the overview page. No, don't really need this. We're not going to publish anything today. And open this up in Solution Explorer, we can start to navigate through these files and we'll look at it. But let's just boot it up and let's just take a look at the template. And presumably the first time it'll run a little slower. Takes a second the first time to get things going. And so local host, and we got a different port than our backend. So movies API in our backend was 7027, right? And front end is 71. It just picks a random port. We can click on weather, and you kind of see there's a weather getting some current dates. Clearly just dummy data. But that's what the template looks like. There's an about page, which is an external link, doesn't really do anything here. But there's a nav bar on the left. We're going to change this nav bar. And we've got a couple of links. So that's what that looks like out of the box. Let's pin up our Solution Explorer and just kind of glance through here. I think Program CS is always a good place to start. This looks a whole lot like a Program CS and an MVC app. It also, again, if you've kind of worked in the Node environment, this is where you'll have these different middleware calls. We're going to be kind of noting, I'm going to make some notes in here with comments about what each thing is doing here, because I think that's going to be helpful for people learning Blazor for the first time. App settings, not much going on in app settings. Components is really interesting because that's what Razor is all about, building these reusable components. We've got some routes. Don't think we're going to have to touch these routes too much. This is, again, what's really nice about the single page applications is that you can have different links and it looks like different pages, but it's really just using some, really fast JavaScript on the front end, using these routers to kind of handle going from page to page. App.razor, you could see a standard HTML5 doc type, and there's really two things worth pointing out here. Head outlet, of course. As you should know, HTML, what goes up in the head are the extras, as I always refer to them. Things like links to your CSS, maybe links to your fave icons, maybe links to JavaScript. A lot of times links to JavaScript go down in the bottom. Of course, the title tag. If I hold down Control, well, head outlet is basically where, it's kind of leaving room for the title tag and additional things that you might want to put up in the head. And then routes, of course, that's going to be used for navigation. We'll dive into that element. But, obviously these elements are not part of HTML. That's why they're colored differently. And, these are what components look like, right? They look just like HTML elements, but they're custom. And you can have different components here. Like there's a home component. You could see home.razor, and obviously there's page title. Of course, page title ultimately is going to end up in your head outlet. And then you got an H1 hello world and welcome to your new app. And then this is app page, / which of course is the root. Then we got weather.razor. So you can kind of see a little bit, there's like a code block in here. And simulate asynchronous loading. So it's like, hey, just wait half a second to make it look like it's pulling from a data source. It's taking a second, even though all our data is just right in here. Here's a class called weather forecast, and this is ultimately helping us populate that weather page. Of course, layout and layout. So again, you kind of start here in app.razor, and main layout div class page, div class sidebar. So if I were to look at this page, of course I should see div class page, div class sidebar. So really, this is the outermost layout after your app.razor. So this is kind of the parent. If I were to look at the first child, if you will, the first inside of the body, which is obviously right here, this script tag is ultimately what's loading the main layout. Okay, so again, app.razor has this script tag. It's doing something with routes up here. We'll come back to that, but this script tag is loading main layout. Main layout has a sidebar, a nav menu, a main section, and an app body. Okay, well, what comes in an app body are our pages. So inside of there, this H1 and this welcome to your new app ultimately will be rendered where this body, app body is at. So that's the general workflow of Blazor. Now, nav menu, you can kind of see here. This is going to be our sidebar, of course, and we got these nav links. So our anchor tag is going to be replaced with nav links. That's going to allow us to actually have that very fast JavaScript enabled nav bar, so we don't actually have to use the anchor tag for our links. So that's the general layout. Of course, under www root, so those are your components. Under these are your static files. So it looks like Bootstrap's in here by default, version 5.1. There's kind of like a global app CSS for custom CSS, and it's also kind of each Razor component. So if I were to go to my main layout, if I hit this down arrow, found this interesting. There's your CSS file, main layout Razor, for that component. And so some CSS you'll find in the global kind of CSS here. And then there's also CSS for each component. And so here are some additional CSS files that are providing CSS for these components. Okay, so what I want to do, because I found this helpful, is I'm going to break down a few things in this program CS with comments. Because I think it'll help you understand kind of the template, what's going on in this application. So this first comment, and if you've followed me before, you kind of see I have a subscription to GitHub Copilot, so it might write the comments for me. So if I just do this, you could see create a new instance of the web application class Okay, so what are we doing here? We're building web applications, so it makes sense to create a variable to build a web application. Okay, so that makes sense. We got this builder variable that is of type web application. Makes sense. I talked about dependency injection already, and add services to the container. Okay, what are services? Services are objects that are used to add functionality to the application. Okay, so I kind of talked about in object-oriented programming, you have classes and you have objects. Objects are instances of classes, and so this services will instantiate our classes and make these objects available for us to use. So services are objects, right? They're instances of classes that are used to add functionality. Now, I kind of wondered what objects are they, that we get to use. So such as navigation manager and HTTP client. So these are two objects that we're going to use that without this method call, we couldn't use navigation manager or HTTP client. Navigation manager is for navigation across pages, and HTTP client is used to contact the back end. Also a note on here, Razor components are a new feature in ASP.NET Core, and I don't know if 6.0 is the right version number, but whatever the version number is, that allows you to build web applications using C#. Okay. So here, builder.build means build the application, create an instance of the web application class. So here we have a web application, but we haven't instantiated it. So we've essentially instantiating this object right here on line 11 and storing it in this variable called app. This piece right here, line 21, use HTTPS redirection. Will redirect HTTP to HTTPS, so we're using HTTPS by default. Use static files, of course, in the www root folder. So this makes our static files available in the www root folder. Anti-forgery, protect against cross-site request forgery attacks. And so some built-in security, preventing from other sites trying to attack ours. Map Razor components to the app. So our components that we're going to be built out will be usable by the app, and of course then start the application. Okay, hopefully you found that a little bit useful, but I think it's a good idea to kind of assess the code that's there and when you're starting from a template. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by bringing over my models. I didn't love this part that I had to, of course, in coding, one very common concept is keeping your code dry and not repeating yourself, right? So I had to bring over my models, which we're working with movies. And so I'm going to add a new folder. I'm going to call that folder models. And I'm going to add a C# class. And this was code duplication, right? So I had a movie class. And this movie class, it was a copy and paste of my movie class in the back end. So I didn't love that, right? So let me stop the application, and it doesn't like that I don't have a genre, so let's also bring over the genre class. Add class of genre, and again, you can copy, or if you're following along, go back and pause the video wherever you need it. But yeah, these models are the exact models that I had on my back end. Didn't love that I had to duplicate that code. Nonetheless, that's where I'm going to start with this. Next up, we could just jump right into it. Now I do want to modify the nav bar and things like that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the data out of the database and put it on a page, right? So we do have a home page, home.razor right here, and I just want to get this home.razor, showing some movies, and I'll customize this to do that. So where I'm going to start is by making a client for our movies. And, this goes back to, when you had these, when you're first studying object-oriented programming, you learn about clients and drivers, right? Clients are classes that are to be used by the application. And so, drivers are the files that run the clients. And so, the language here, when you have clients and drivers, clients again are just classes that are meant to be used by another class. And so that's the terminology here. So I'm going to go ahead and that's nothing new. That's been around since, clients and drivers have been around since the 90s with Java. That's the first time I learned about it. This concept, this language, was when I first studied Java. Object-oriented programming language there is Java, just like C#. And of course, C# was kind of based on Java. So let's create a folder called clients. So under the project, I'm going to add a folder called clients. And now under clients, let's make a file called movies client. And again, the whole point of this client is to be used somewhere else in the application. But the movies client, using dependency injection, we are going to accept an HTTP client called HTTP client. Now, again, this is dependency injection. This object can be passed in because in our program CS, we've got this line right here. Okay, so HTTP client can just be passed into our movies client. This is going to allow us to connect to our back end. But as I'm writing this out, I'm going, oh, wait a minute. Don't we need to actually wire up our settings? Like, where is our back end? To wire up our back end, this is going to be done in app settings.json. And so I'm going to add a comma here. I'm just going to make an environment variable. I'm going to call this my movie API URL. And it is, what is the address here? Let me go to my movies API, and we're going to bring over everything from the HTTPS all the way through the port number, not including that / there. I'm going to paste that in. Localhost 7027. Okay. Okay, so that's the first step. Don't forget your comma. And here is the variable called movie API URL. Of course, that would be nice if that was it, but it's not. We now have to tell our program CS to use that variable, which we will do after add Razor components. So I'm going to do var movie app URL builder configuration. Okay. So this is how we're going to get that variable out of the app settings.json. Otherwise, if that doesn't work, we will throw an exception, new exception, and just crash movie API URL is not set. So if that doesn't work, if this line doesn't work, we'll throw an exception just to boot it up here and make sure it does not throw that exception. We will do that. Build succeeded. Well, the backend's not running, so it did throw an exception. So let's run that backend. So that's kind of good to see what happens if the backend's not running. So now the backend is running. I should be able to get my movies, and that's still working. Now if I go back to my front end and I run it, I should get a different experience. It says the web server sometimes. Let's just close it all. Let's run the backend, movies API. Did I call it the same thing? Movie app URL? No, I did not. Movie API URL. Use the variable that you created. Well, at least now you know what the exception looks like, because you saw it 3 times. Call your variable the same thing in program CS as your app settings. Movie API URL there on line 9, movie API URL right there on line 11. Okay, so now we're talking. Our front end's talking to our back end. At least we're able to, well, not all the way, but we're on our way. So let's go back to movies client. Okay, we have this HTTP client. Let's write a method here. Public async task movie. We have to bring in our models. This is going to be a movie array that we're going to return called get movies async. should return await HTTP client get JSON from async Okay, so let's talk this through. We're writing a method here. The method is called getMoviesAsync. It returns an array of movies, a task, if you will, whenever it's done, but ultimately it will return an array of movies. Inside of this method, when you call this method, it's using an asynchronous await using HTTP client, get JSON from async, type movies. Okay, we're appending the movies. So slash movies is the route that we're calling on our back end. Now there's no slash there. At least I didn't have a slash the first time. So essentially what the route, the back end route that this hits, if I pull up my movies API, is slash movies, right? We stored this in a variable, and we're adding slash movies. So, you know, we coded really this part of the URL and the slash movies. This slash movies is what's in the string right here, right? So this is saying, hey, asynchronously go to the slash movies, and if it doesn't work, return an empty array. And that's the first method in our movies client. Okay, now we have to make this movies client accessible to our front end code. Well, our front end code is inside of components. So we have to make this movies client accessible to our components. Notice HTTP client is accessible here because of dependency injection. And we're going to do the same thing with movies client. We're going to make this class. We're going to use dependency injection so that we can instantiate this class back here in this services container. Okay, and so the object will be built here by this services container, and then you can pass it in to the component. So that's kind of cool. So here's this type of movies client, and let's write this line of code after our variable here. We're going to do builder services dot add HTTP client called movies client, and client arrow Okay, so basically the address of our client is this URL that we configured right here in line 12. So you can see here, this is going to allow the movies client to be passed into our home.razor. So check this out. So here's home.razor. And we can use, again, an inject called client. Now, this is not compiling. Why? Well, we need to tell, we probably need to update our imports. So here's imports.razor, and these are all the places that we're looking, and so we should add a using statement here to our models. That's fine, but also movies client, we need our clients. So at using movies Blazor dot clients. Now it's at least a recognized type, and now that compiles through. So again, the imports.razor, you know, these are the folders that are looked for the different classes, and then so since that class was inside there, We just had to put that there. Now movies client is here, and I'm just going to call this my movies database. And my page title, of course, that's going to go up in the HTML title. And let's start with the div bootstrap class of row and an h1 class of text center, text primary, and it says my movies. And if you boot this up, okay, we're starting to customize this a little bit. We got a lot of customization to go, but this is getting a start. All right, next up, I'm gonna write a code block, and this is the beauty of Blazor. With an @code, we can write C# right in here. So anytime you see the @ symbol, you should, identify that as we got some C# coming. I'm gonna have a private movie, and it could be a list, movie array, nullable, called movies. And there's a method here called onInitialized async, and this is basically when the component loads, right? We got different components here. This is the home component, home.razor is the home component. And so this method is called when the component is initialized. So onInitialized async, and I don't think our method is called that. Our method is called getMoviesAsync. So here we've got an array of movies, and we get our movies when the component loads. And let's up in our div, we'll say if movies, so now this movies variable is accessible in our HTML. So if movies is null, okay, if movies is null, we'll do a paragraph class of text center, and this says loading ... else for each var movie in movies, let's just spit out h1 @movie dot name. So if this is all working through, we're just gonna put the movie names in a bunch of h1s, and obviously all of that's coming all the way back to the database, right? So our front end is contacting the middle tier, if you will, in the API. The API is calling the database is responding to the API, back to the front end, all the way through those tiers. And I think I got my back end running. That's always the challenge, is to make sure that your back end is running. Don't forget to run the back end. And there you go. We are doing a read operation, which is cool. Now what? Well, I like to put these in some sort of component, get bootstrap. Of course, I like cards, and so bootstrap cards. It'd be nice if my movies had images, but they don't currently. If you want images, you can throw them in the you'd have to give your movies like a string URL for the path, and then point that at the www root, and then put all your images in www root to statically serve up those images. But you got cards, card bodies, card titles, change the background. So I'm going to put each one of these in a card instead of a heading, and we'll do a little bit of rows and columns, bootstrap grids. So this is working. Here I'll do a div class of row. Row calls 1, row calls medium 3. I'll explain the grid here, gutter 4. And close my div here. So the Bootstrap grid system says you get you add up to 12, right? So you'll get 3 divs. Excuse me, I think it's going to be 4 if this adds up to 12. 4 cards per row, but I'm remembering 3, so is it 3 or 4? It would make sense if it was 4. Let's actually write this code. But then here down, and this is medium in larger devices, but for smaller you get 1 item per row, so it's going to be a single column. So this gives you, on medium and larger devices, I believe is 4 items per row, but then for anything less than that, you're getting a single item per row. Let's write our cards. So div class of card, and I did a blue outline, text center on my card. Close my div. Now here's my for each. Let me change this indenting so that it's properly indented a little bit differently. There we go. Oh, I had that right. This makes sense. Sorry, here, back to this. For each. Var movie in movies. We have a card. Sometimes Copilot is crazy helpful, sometimes it just gets in the way. And here is a H5 class of card title. And here's our movie.name. And this will go inside of a div class of card header. Sorry for the choppiness here. Okay, so we put the movie name inside of the card header. Just does a little styling for us, putting it in the header. And then we have a div class of card body. And card text on our paragraph. Does the movie have a genre? Again, this is that navigation property. If it does, display that genre's name. Copy and paste this a couple more times. The second time we'll display the movie price to string in a currency format, and movie dot release date. Okay. Yeah, that was throwing me off. I got to look at my grid system because I remembered it being 3 items per row. But if you say medium 3, you would think that would add up to 3, 3, 3, and 3. That equals 12, so that's 4 items per row. Let's just change that to a medium 4. Oh, that's literally 3 items per row. Aha! Works a little differently. You don't have to add up to 12. You literally just say 3. Today I learned that's part of the grid system that this rows hyphen calls works a little differently. That's not something I'm familiar with until now. I literally just today I learned. And so if you kind of condense this page down, ultimately, there you go, to like a mobile view, you get 1 item per row. So that's cool. I like that feature. How many items per row? Each child counts as an item. So this is 3 items per row. Very nice. And there we have it. So we are doing the read operation. Let's go ahead and change up our nav bar. And then we can get into the edit, add a new, and delete operations. But I wanted to wire up the read operation first before I started messing around with that nav bar. So we'll fix up the nav bar real quick. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to open up my nav bar component. So let me just close this all down, close all documents, and remember that the nav bar is kind of located here under the nav menu, and there is a sidebar here under the main layout. And so I'm going to get rid of that sidebar. I want my nav bar to just go across the top. And we can keep the rest of it for now, but I didn't want my navigation on the side. I wanted it going across the top, and then I'm going to delete this. Now, one thing I did notice is that these nav links, I didn't use them, which maybe I should have, but I didn't use them in my first version of this. So I'm going to delete what's there. I'm going to get a nav bar from Get Bootstrap. Nav bar. And if you kind of go through the nav bars, this is the crazy nav bar with everything involved. Don't need that, but we need more than just a brand or an image. So as you scroll down a little bit more, kind of get a real basic nav bar right here. That's all we really need, is a basic nav bar. Copy that, paste that in. And I'm going to say the href to home, it's just a / is home. I don't need any of those other links right now. Let's just save that and see what that does. See, that gives me a decent nav bar. Okay. Still off to the side. Got to fix that. But there's a home. Now, remember there's some CSS that's being applied here. So let's go to the nav. I'm just going to delete that CSS. I don't want that. And also main layout. What do I want to do with main layout? I deleted it all. So let's get rid of that, get rid of that. Now my nav bar is going across the top. There is one more additional nav bar. I think that about might be somewhere else. Let's see, let's close those CSS. So I deleted those CSS files. Again, going here, there's no about here. So let me find that about. Pause, I'll find it. Okay, yeah, there it is. So this is back under the main layout. We've got a div kind of pointing there to about. So I just delete that. That's looking good. We just got a nav bar goes across the whole page, but if I scroll down small enough, we get a mobile nav. Now that's not looking good. So let's clean up our nav bar because clearly that button needs to not only be visible, but it needs to work. So probably we're not bringing in what we need to for Bootstrap JavaScript. And so let's kind of look back here under the app.razor. And what I'm noticing is we're bringing in CSS, I don't see any, I see Bootstrap CSS. I don't see any JavaScript that's brought in for Bootstrap. So of course that would be why that's not loading, or why that nav bar is not functioning, because you need the JavaScript there for that to work. And if I go back to wroot bootstrap, just see the CSS file. So we can bring in Bootstrap as a dependency, or you can use the CDN. The easy thing to do is use the CDN. Go back to the Bootstrap docs and you click on this docs link, and then you scroll down, and here's the CDN for the JavaScript file. Notice this is put just above the closing body tag. So if I copy that and paste, refresh this, okay, now that's getting some reaction. And then what I want to do is change the color of my nav bar to be dark so that it kind of contrasts against the white. And that's done. Back in my nav menu, body tertiary, there's an attribute here, data hyphen bootstrap theme equals dark. And I think something's overriding it, which might be this. No, that's fine. Nav bar expand large. So this was a tricky one to get this nav bar dark because that's actually a feature of 5.3, and so Bootstrap 5.3, I want to say. Point is, I think 5.1 it's not there, and so the fix is to apply the CDN link from 5.3. So here is the JavaScript CDN that we brought in, and you have to replace the CSS from a local file to the CDN. So going back to getting started with Bootstrap, literally just copy this link right here for the CSS and paste it. Here I pasted it over line 8. I replaced line 8, which was a local CSS. And that got my nav bar to dark, which then shows my little, there we go, and my link works. It's savvy enough. Well, we'll see as I start changing pages. So there's the nav bar change that I wanted to make. We're reading some movies, and now we got some other operations to work with our movies in the database. All right, the next operations to work on are add a new movie and to edit a movie. And we're going to do these two operations as one web page. And you'll see how this is implemented. But the reasoning why add and edit are going to be done kind of as a single component for a single page is that if you think of the controls for adding a new movie, you're going to have a movie name, a genre, a price. Those controls are the same controls if you were to edit a movie. And so it is one way to kind of keep your code dry and not repeat, dry meaning do not repeat yourself. We're going to reuse those controls for both the add operation and the edit operation. With that being in mind, if you think of adding a new movie, you might think of, well, I have a list of genres, and that list of genres is in a drop-down box. And as it turns out, when I was first recording the backend API, I just focused on movies. I did not make any endpoints for our API to extract genres out of the database. And of course, our front end is going to need to be able to read genres out of the database. So we need to wire that up really quick. And so there's just a couple of edits or things that we're going to add to our backend to be able to read genres out of the database. And you can kind of go to your movies API backend and see some of the code here that we have for our movies endpoint. And that's kind of very similar to what we will do for our genres. I will go ahead under our endpoints, and this is kind of our template for genres. We'll add a class called genres endpoints. Okay, now this is a static class with a static method. So right away I'm going to change the class to static, and I will have a static method that returns a route group builder data type, map genres endpoints is our method name, and we are extending, this is an extension method, the web application class called app. And our genres endpoints are going to start with the /genres. And so here, this is kind of the beginning of our URL, /genres. And with parameters validation, did some back-end validation on our data. And then group dot map get, so at the / at the root, async we'll bring in our movie context. Now we have to recognize this by bringing in our using statement up top called movie context, and we're going to await return the genres to list async. The last thing to do here, I think it's not too happy with my single quote maybe. I'm going to return the group, and so this is, let's change this to a double quote, And I need to make this an await. Genres to list async. And our context, let's see, we do have genres. That's right, there's one more using statement that we have to bring in, which is Entity Framework Core. Let's go ahead and bring in using Microsoft's Entity Framework Core, and that'll resolve that error. Okay, so this should allow us to get our genres out of the database. Again, if I kind of take a look at the database, SQL Server, local DB, and we could just look at my movie DB, tables, genres. We've got 5 genres, IDs 1 through 5, and their associated names. And so the next step is to add these endpoints to our program CS. And anytime you change your program CS, you do want to kind of reboot the back end. And let's go to main HTTP, and let's add in another get HTTPS localhost 7027/genres. And if I boot this up, and I get my /movies. Okay. Now if I get my /genres, we are returning our 5 genres with this API, with this route /genres. So that's what we left off of the back end. This allows me to switch to my front end, which is movies Blazor, and continue on with a new component. Again, this one component is for adding and editing our movies. Let me kind of close these files that I'm not using. Let me just close all tabs. And we will add a component under pages. Right now we're just using this home. I'm going to add a new Razor component, and this will be called add edit. So it's going to do both operations, add edit.razor. Okay, and if I kind of look back on the home, you can see we brought in a movies client. We're going to need to also bring in a genre client. So we're going to need to be able to hit the movies routes on our back end. We're also going to be able to hit the genres. So another file that we're going to need to create under our clients folder. Let's add a class. Add a class. This is genres client. And let's say using our movies Blazor.models, so it can recognize the genres model. And here we're going to bring in our HTTP client called HTTP client using dependency injection. And we're going to write one async method. It's going to return a task of genre array. So we're going to return an array of genres. It's an async method, so we return a task called get genres async, and this returns await HTTP client get JSON from. Now this is, it's not /API/genres, it's just genres. So this hits our backend route of /genres. So when we call this method, it'll hit our backend route /genres. And if it doesn't return, we'll just return an empty array. So if it can't get the genres, we'll return an empty array instead. So there's our genres client, of which we need to enable that with dependency injection. So let's go back to program CS, and just like we did here, where we added the movies client so we could pass the movies client into our front end Razor pages, we're going to do builder services dot add HTTP client genres client. There we go. So this will allow us to pass in the movies client and the genres client, just how we did here. We passed in movies client using this inject command here. So on add edit, we will do app page / add edit movie, and let's inject the movies client and inject the genres client. I'll call this movies client, genres client. Now I would expect that to be a different color. Let me fix that. So on the page imports, I am bringing in the clients, which makes sense, right? If it was working on home page. So this is the route, add edit movie. Let me look a little closer. Okay, I'm going to come back to the fact that this is not the color here that I'm expecting it to be. It is building right now, so I think, you know, it'll error out to me. I think this will error out here as I get going. So let's do a page title. So after my injects, I just want to do a page title, add or edit movie, and I'm going to change this here in a little bit, but I'm just going to save this, and I'm going to hit the route add edit movie. So here are my movies. If I hit / add edit movie, okay, I must have had a typo. What I've done to troubleshoot and fix is I deleted my add edit.razor. I deleted the file, and upon recreating it, I literally just right click delete, and I recreated the same add edit.razor, and now I'm getting my color coding the way I would expect it to. So everything looks like that's working, and my back end is currently running. If I run my front end and I go to slash add edit movie, now I hit that landing page. So I'm thinking I had a typo in the dot in the file extension. I'm not sure, can't rewind myself. Nonetheless, it looks like a typo. One more thing to bring in besides our clients is a navigation manager. In this navigation manager, you'll see once we add a new movie, we're going to kind of navigate back to the root. And because this page will serve two purposes. If we go to slash add edit movie, that'll kind of be like your add operation. Also, there'll be a route here. If there's a parameter variable in the route with a number, so add edit movie /1, that'll be an edit operation. And the last thing to do here is change the render mode into interactive server. And so since we're not dealing with just static files, we are going to be making changes and updating movies, right? So we're not just having a static file sent down, which is kind of the default. We need to change the render mode to interactive server here. And so we're going to set the render mode to interactive server. Now there's one more step necessary to enable this interactive server render mode. Again, this is meaning the server is going to send us information, and we're going to interact with that and add new movies and edit movies and the such. We need to go into Program CS, and down here we need to add a .add interactive server render mode. Enables server side rendering of the components. Okay. And so in our code block, we're going to do a couple of things as we start to build this out. We have this ID right here, and if an ID is passed via the route, okay, we know we're going to be doing an edit operation. So in our code, we can say, hey, if there's a parameter passed via the URL called ID, you populate it in this field. So this ID passed in the route will be set to this ID property down here in the code block if it's sent. And we're also going to create a movie variable. And this movie, we're going to say, hey, from the form, we haven't created the form, the HTML form. From the form, get your parameter from this form. So this parameter comes from the route. This movie parameter comes from the form. And this is a private movie. We're going to have an array of genres. And we're going to initialize it to an empty array. Type genre. And we will have a title. And this will be the page title. So these are just setting up some variables here. We're going to have a variable for the ID. If it's an edit operation, we'll have an ID. We're going to have a movie variable that will be used to obviously add or edit the movie. A genre variable, obviously used to loop over this and populate our drop-down list. And a title, which will be the page title. And let's go down a little bit. I'm going to bring in this method that when the component is initialized, we're going to load up our genres variable. So again, anytime this add edit component is initialized, let's load up our genres. And here's another method that says when a parameter is set, and I'll talk through this code here. When the parameters are set, you know, on the page load or when you get it from the form, here you can see if the ID has a value, then get the movie by ID. Now, movies client, our movies client doesn't have get movie async. So let's movies client. Right now, I only have a get all movies, so I need to write another method to get a movie, get a single movie. So if the ID, remember this ID has value, this is an edit operation. And the else block is a add operation. If there's an ID already of a movie, then get that movie by ID and set the title, the page's title, to edit movie name. Otherwise, we're doing an add operation, generating an empty movie object, and setting a movie title of maybe say add new movie. Okay, just to get this to compile, let's write this method to get movie async. This is in our movies client. So let's get the movie by the ID. Let's see, public async task, get movie. Sure, get movie by ID async. Await, I'll have to change it on the other end. Await HTTP client /movies/ID. Let's check our backend route and make sure that it's /movies/3. So there's our backend route, /movies/ID, /movies/ID. So that should work. And if it doesn't find it, let's just throw new exception, could not find movie. Now this get movie by ID async is now that. Cool. Okay, so here we're populating our movie one way or another. When the parameter is set, we're either saying, hey, it's a new movie, or it's a movie that we are editing, and we're setting our page title. We're getting our genres on the component initialized. So 2 different methods there. And now I'm wanting to start to write my markup, right? So this is all in my code. And my markup up here, I'm going to change my title to that title variable. And the H3 will also be whatever that title says. And let me have a bootstrap row. Call medium 4. And this is an interesting tag. Edit form model at movie. So this is a form. You could see that this edit form, if you read, let's close it. This will render an HTML form, right? And obviously a form that we're doing an edit operation with, right? This form is working with our movie variable. So this variable that we created down below, right? So we said supply parameter from form, and we tied this movie in, dedicating this form to have that specific model of a type of movie. And form name will be add edit movie. And now we start bringing in controls. Now, I'm a fan of Bootstrap floating labels. If you've taken my class, you know that. So I'm going to add a class of form floating MB3. This is an input text. So here's our text box. Bootstrap class of form control. ID is name, and a bind value, bind hyphen value equals movie.name. Now it is telling me possibly a null reference, and so in order to fix that, we just put this in an if-else block. And so I'll say at if, and I did this, if genres is null or movie is null, then we do a little paragraph that says loading. Else, we do this markup. So now we'll never hit this if there's a null case. Okay, so we got a text box that's a Bootstrap form control. ID is name. We're binding that to the movie name. And here's the associated label. Again, this will be a floating label. Label for name. And it says name. And then we can add a little validation control here. Validation message for little lambda movie.name. Okay, so you can see we're going to have one control here with a label. Let's stop the application and restart it. And then route to add edit movie. me fix this. This might just be that I need to shut everything down again. Let me close all windows, boot up the back end. Okay, get all my movies, get a movie by ID. Now let me start up the front end. See if I get that same error. I do. But we did this, so let me look a little closer. Here we go. I left one piece off. Builder services, add Razor components, dot, add interactive server components. So I forgot that line. There we go. ChatGPT didn't help me, but that's okay. So now we're up / add edit movie, and our one control is showing up, and there's our floating label. At least it's inside of the text box. Add new movie is our title. Add new movie, because we don't have part of the route, we don't have the /1. Getting a movie by the ID is in fact working, and it is populating the movie title. So our first control is good, and let's continue on our add edit Razor. So here is our first control. And let's bring in our drop-down list. So after this control, I'm just going to paste in our drop-down list. So as this is an input text, this is an input select. The first option says select a genre. We're binding it to the movie genre ID. And for each genre in our variable genres, which is an array, we're plopping out an option that'll show the name, and it'll be on the back end linked up to the ID. There's a label. This will be a floating label and a validation message for. There's also a couple more validation controls that I will bring in up at the top. So there's a validation summary control. So you get individual validation message errors, right? For individual controls. There's also a validation summary at the top. And this, you're getting your validation errors from your data annotations that come from your class. So there is our genre. Let's bring in our price. So this is a text box. Bind to the movie price. Validation for the price. Let's bring in the release date. Again, floating labels. Input type of date. So these, notice, we have an input text, input select, input number, and input date. These are all different controls that will be rendered on the client. And a save and a cancel button. Now after this div, so you might wonder, when you click the save button, like, then what? And we haven't wired up that logic yet. So we have to make an event listener, if you will, a method that responds to that. And if we hit the cancel button, just notice we navigate to the root. And so up at the top of our edit form, we're going to have an on valid submit. We're going to write a method called handle submit async. So we need to write the event handler. in our code block, private async method returns a task, handles submit async, and here basically if the movie is null, we're gonna throw an exception, argument exception, throw if null. Argument null exception. There we go. And if the ID property is null, then we're doing an add operation. We're going to say await movies client add movie async. This is a method we haven't written, so I'll comment that out. So if the ID is null, we're doing an add operation. Else movie ID so we're going to set the movie's ID equal to the parameter's value and await movies client update movie async. Okay, so here's a couple of methods, the add movie async and the update movie async that we need to write. Finally, we get to use our navigation manager and navigate to the root regardless of operation. Okay, so this submit button is not yet working because we have to write a couple of methods. Nonetheless, let's navigate to our page. Add edit movie. Name, genre is working. Price and release date. These buttons don't work yet. We haven't wired those up. And if I just do like a /1, notice it is hitting my database, pulling out the movie title, so on and so forth. So add and edit are on their way. We are almost done with these two operations, but we need to, just like here, we wrote a couple of methods to hit our back end and get all the movies or get a single movie. We need to write a method, a couple of methods here to do those different operations. So let's go to movies client and we'll do add movie async first. Add a new movie, public async task, now we will accept a movie into this method that came from our form. And when we post as JSON async, we post to /movies. If I look at my route here, if I post to /movies, that allows us to add a new movie. So our backend route posting to /movies looks right, and passing the movie object. So there's add movie async. And back here, add movie async. Must have had a typo there. Add movie async, pass in the movie. And let's run it. /add edit movie. A new movie. Action 12. And there it hits our database. So we are adding a new movie. That operation works. And that would be what, number 7? Excuse me. Add edit movie 1, add edit movie 7, through an exception, 404 not found, 6. So it got me to 2 towers. Add edit movie /6 is my 2 towers. Probably it's because it's not ID of 7. Like if I go into here and I look at my database and actually see what the ID is, sometimes they skip numbers, and yeah, for some reason that's number 8, which was my guess. So if I go back here, /add edit movie /8, there we go. Throw the numbers 11 on it. Okay, and this edit operation is not quite yet working. Because we have not written that logic yet in our movies client. So we have to continue. Again, here, the update movie has not been written. So let's go to our movies client. And update a movie. Paste in the logic here. Public task async update movie. Pass in the movie. We're doing a put. So let's go to our back end. Make sure that our update is in fact here is a put. Looks good. /movies /movie ID. So again, /movies /7. That's an update operation, looking good, along with our updated movie. So there's our method, updated movie async. Back on this client, update movie async. /add edit movie. There's a new /8, a new movie. Put the number 113 behind it, and there our edit operation is working. Now we just need to get some links working so that we don't have to know our routes to do these operations, and so that's kind of an easy fix. If I go to my nav bar and under layout, there's my nav menu. There's nav bar nav. I'm gonna add another div. Add edit movie, and this will simply say add movie. Okay, so our href attribute is going to add edit movie. Add edit movie, so this is the add operation. Cancel brings us back home. We've already demonstrated that the add operation works. There's all of our validation, which is what you would expect. And now I'm going to add a little edit button on all of our cards so that you can edit a movie. And where do I want this? I'll put this underneath the date. So, got a lot of files open here. Let's close all tabs. And here's our cards. And I'm going to use some icons built into Bootstrap. So if you go to Get Bootstrap, just to show you the icon set that I'm using, there's Bootstrap icons. And to use these Bootstrap icons, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. And here's the CDN that I'll bring in for these Bootstrap icons. So I'm going to copy this into my app.razor. So there's my Bootstrap CSS, and these are my Bootstrap icons right underneath my Bootstrap link. Now that I have these Bootstrap icons, I can have an anchor I'm going to come back to this href. There's my anchor tag. Inside my anchor tag, I'm going to have the old italics tag, but the I tag, Bootstrap icon BI, Bootstrap icon BI pencil. And so right now this href tag won't go anywhere, but there should be a pencil there. And what I need this to do is go to the route, like for example, this one would be /add edit movie /1, right? And this would be 2, 3, 4, and so on. So I'm going to write a little helper method here. Called, okay, it's a private method. Static. It's going to return a string called movie URL. It's going to take in an ID. And return string interpolation. So now we have this method called movie URL. That we can call. And pass in the movie movie's ID. And so Now if I hover, it's add edit movie /1/2/8. If I delete that, I should get some validation. And our add and our edit operations are up and running. Last operation coming up next is delete. All right, things are going well here, and the next and final operation is the delete operation. So it would make sense if we're looking at what we have so far to have a little button next to the edit button that would allow us to delete a movie. And so it also would make sense, you know, if you click this delete button, there's a couple ways you could go, which would be to direct you to a delete page, or the other direction I'm going to take this is to utilize a control that is a modal control in Bootstrap. So to kind of show this modal control, you know, a modal window is just a window that pops up and you have to interact with it. Sometimes it can kind of lock out the background, but if you kind of scroll down here, there's a demo on the docs of Bootstrap, and this is, you know, a modal window. You can see it's got a title and a couple of buttons to either close or save changes. And so the title will ask us, you know, do you really want to delete this movie? And then, you know, a delete button or a cancel button. And so as we look at the modal, number one, you have to have your JavaScript properly linked. We've already demonstrated that. We do have our JavaScript linked because this navbar would not behave this way without the JavaScript for Bootstrap properly linked. So we've already taken care of that piece. So that's required, is the JavaScript there. And another thing, if you look at the markup here, that you have to pay attention to in Bootstrap, you know, sometimes with like the navbar and other controls, components. If you start looking at this markup, you know, we have the button. This is the button right here. There's really two parts. There's the button, and then on the button click, you see this markup, right? So you can kind of break a modal down into these two parts. And the important part of a modal is that they have to link the button to the rest of the markup somehow. So these two parts have to be linked, and the way that they're linked is through the ID. And so notice that this modal has an ID of example modal, highlight that there. And how that is linked to the button, the other part, is with the pound symbol and then the ID of example modal. So the ID is down here, linked to the button with this data bootstrap target equals, and then the ID selector, pound symbol, and then the ID. So as this is going to work out, we're going to have a bunch of different modal windows, and their IDs all need to be unique. And so there'll be a modal window for this one, there'll be a modal window for this one, and they'll basically have unique IDs. So that's the first part. And you know, they need to, their IDs need to be unique, and they need to link to the correct button to get this all to work. So that's what we're doing for the delete. I think it's just a nice way to add this delete feature. I'll start by kind of copying, well, I'm going to copy the button and kind of go here and at least get this button looking like a button. So if I go to my front end, Movies Blazor, we have Bootstrap cards, and right after our button here for the edit operation, I will have my button for the delete operation. Now this target I'm going to take out the ID that's there. Because again, this is going to have to be, this isn't a for each loop, right? It's for each movie. So each movie is going to have a unique ID and a unique target. So we're going to write a method to kind of dynamically generate that. So you'll see that part. I'm going to get rid of the text that's in the button. I'm going to replace that with the bootstrap icon, which is the prefix BI there, and the trash can, BI trash. Is what I'm looking for, and because this is a delete operation, I'll do the button danger, just to get the button looking like I want it to look. So save, it'll do its little hot reload there. By the way, hot reload on save, hot reload on file save. If I did not show that setting, that's a nice setting that I can simply save and it'll refresh the browser. So that's what I'm looking for. Of course, these buttons aren't doing anything yet. And that's where we need to write our next component. And so far in our components, we have a couple of pages. And I was thinking about this morning, that we haven't really implemented a component in the way that we're about to. So like we have this home component that loads, on the page load, on the application load. So this is home Razor is where your website starts. It's the home page. And then we kind of made this other component that we can navigate to, call it the add edit component. And you can navigate there by going to a URL. But we haven't implemented a component like we're about to. So it's going to be a little bit different than the last one. So here under pages, I'll add my next component. And this will be called delete movie. Delete movie.razor. So our component will be named, delete movie. And let's go to the top, and I'm going to inject a movies client called client. And inject my navigation manager. And I'm going to set my render mode to interactive server, just as before. Now, again, my color coding isn't showing up, and I'm not sure why. And so all I did last time is I literally deleted the component. I'm not sure if you're following the code along, if your color coding is correct. I'm not sure why. Just like last time, I'm just going to recreate this. Add a Razor component. Delete movie. It added the .razor for me this time. Man, that is the weirdest thing. And I cannot answer that. If that is a bug with Visual Studio, if you're following along and you're having this problem, let me know if you're having the same problem. It doesn't work the first time I create the component, but it does work the second time. That's the weirdest thing. Okay. So as we break this down, the button we're going to keep here, but the modal markup we are going to put in our delete movie.razor. So it's going to be weird because, again, we're going to have to link up this data target to an ID that's over here. And so when you learn a tool like Blazor, and you learn about components, you learn that you can pass data down to children. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to have this component that is going to be a child of home.razor. So we're going to be able to take a movie for each movie, and we're going to pass each movie down to the child component that is the delete movie. So I'll show you how that's done, but that is one way that you're able to pass data from a parent component down to a child. And so again, if you've dealt with React, you've probably seen that before. What I want to do now is I'm going to go to Bootstrap, and I'm going to copy my modal window markup, and I'll even bring in the comment here. I'm going to copy this and paste. And again, the ID is going to be dynamically generated, so I'm going to start by deleting that ID. Tab index meaning you don't tab onto this control. So if the user hits tab, this modal window is not visible by default. And so some of these Bootstrap classes of modal and fade will do that. It will hide our modal window for us. So all these modal windows, they'll be in the markup of the page, but they'll just be hidden by our CSS. So if we kind of dive into a modal dialog, we'll keep that class, modal content, header, body, footer, right? Pretty standard to have a header section, a body section, and a footer section. I'm just going to delete the body. In the header, the title here will be, are you sure you want to delete Batman? So that's going to be the H1. That'll be the text that the user sees, basically a confirmation text. And here's our close button. And you can see here it'll dismiss the modal, and we keep that just the same. And then in the footer, this is the button. Let's see, there's a button in the header and there's a button in the footer. This one says close. I don't remember seeing the button in the header, but nonetheless, this is the button. These two buttons are in the footer, and this is the button that I'm picturing in my head, cancel. The cancel button, and dismiss the modal. This is a button secondary. This is a button primary. Now, what are we doing here? This is actually a delete button, right? So this text will say delete, and that's the markup that we're ready to go. Again, what we have left to do here is write a method to kind of dynamically generate the ID. So where did that go? As I'm looking here, this ID is currently blank, and I have to fix that. So I'm going to write a method that is called getModalID, and that is coming. Now, we said we're going to be able to pass data from the parent down to the child. What we're passing is an entire movie. So what we're marking here in my code is we're expecting a movie being sent as a parameter here. So I'm going to say public movie is nullable, called movie, get set. And so this is kind of the data that we're expecting. And so we're setting this up. And let's go ahead and write this method, public. Now, we're going to write a static method because the method needs to be accessible here to dynamically generate the ID here in the modal as well as here in the parent, right? So we're going to generate a method that's static so that you can call it in those two places. So let's do that. Public static string get modal ID, and into this we're going to pass a movie nullable movie called movie, and this is going to return string interpolation delete modal hyphen and then the movie's ID. Throw a little semicolon at the end and save. Now we can also throw an exception if for whatever reason the movie that you're sending across is null, because this is a nullable movie. So if you happen to get argument null exception, we've done this throw if null. We're just going to throw an exception and kind of crash the program if a null movie is passed into this. Okay, so here, get modal ID, basically the ID will say the delete modal hyphen and then the movie's ID. So delete modal 1, delete modal 2, delete modal 3. Okay, and then all we have to do now is call this in two places. We're going to call it right here in the ID. We're going to call this by putting the at that gets us into the Razor syntax, get modal ID, and pass it the movie object that was passed down, right, that we initialized here. And that's the first place that we write it. And of course, this get modal ID also needs to be written in home.razor. And we're going to do this by calling the static method of delete at symbol, delete movie dot get modal ID. Modal, did I have a typo? I must have. Modal. Let's not have typos. Get modal ID. Now we go back to home.razor. Get rid of my typo over here. And again, so you're in a for each loop here, so you got to pass that movie, lowercase M-O-V-I-E, into that static method. Okay, save that up, and now to test if it works, it did a hot reload. We should be able to kind of inspect our code. I'm going to get out of the device inspection. I'm going to click on the inspect tool, click my button. You can see delete modal 1 is my ID. So it did, that method is working. It exactly is what I would expect it to be. This would be delete modal 2. Now, if I click it, probably not done wiring this up properly. Why? Even though we wrote the component, we haven't put the component on the page. And so here, now that we have the button, we need to bring in our delete movie component with a movie. This is how you actually pass the movie down to a child. So here we're setting the movie property, right? We're setting this movie property that we're expecting as a parameter. So capital movie here, equal to the at movie, which is the movie in the loop, right? Whatever movie you're passing down. So this line creates our component. And again, this is what I was saying on our edit movie. We didn't actually, bring in the edit movie, add edit movie component, right? This add edit. We just navigated to this URL and said that this is a page. But we don't do that here. The way that we show this component is we just add it to the markup by bringing in this delete movie component, passing down the movie. Let me save that and see. Sometimes I still might need to write a little bit more to boot this up. Let me close it all and see if I need to write a little more code to get that window to pop up, or if it should be popping up now. So let me boot up my back end. Let me reboot my back end. Wait for it, send request. Okay, back end is up. Let me bring up my front end. Probably I did need to reboot everything because, again, bringing in a new component, a little bit heavier workload there. Let's boot up the front end. We're reading our movies. Okay, it's still not bringing up the modal, so let me troubleshoot. I suspect I know what's going on. Haven't fixed it yet, but I will point out, click the button and it says cannot read properties of undefined Rini backdrop, so it's my problem. But as I was just realizing, I made it very clear that to link to the target you need a pound symbol, again going back to the Bootstrap docs. And so my data BS target needs a hashtag that I'm thinking I might have left out. Again, if I boot it up and I inspect, my ID down here in the modal matches my target. But if I go back to get Bootstrap docs, maybe this fixes it, maybe it doesn't. I'm having second thoughts because I'm not seeing it in my code demo, but let's fix that regardless. So if I go to here, there is a pound symbol there, so I should be able to one second. Here's what needs to be done. In order to do string interpolation, I'm going to have to write a method here that takes in a movie, and basically that's what I need to do. I need to add that hash tag here, and so I'm going to write a method in my code block that takes in a movie and returns a hashtag. I don't know, pound symbol, hashtag, whatever. Pound symbol that calls delete movie ID, get modal ID. So here, now I just need to call my method get delete modal ID and pass in movie. Right, so now it'll append that that symbol at the front of my ID, refresh, hover, and now you see that pound symbol is there. Okay, now we're cooking. Okay, so now we at least get the modal to pop up. We click cancel, and we are cooking. Okay, all good here. Now we actually want to wire up a function, so that when we click delete, now number one, we should see a title here that says what we're deleting. And then when we click this delete button, it actually performs the delete operation. So a couple of things to work on next. The first one probably is the easiest. Let's go into delete movie, and let's just say what movie we're deleting here in our H1. And so we'll bring in a string, just call it title, and we're going to initialize this on parameter set. And so once the movie is set, then we're going to be able to set the title. And so the method for that, protected override void on parameter set. We're going to set the title equal to delete movie, movie.name. So it'll say, delete movie Batman. So that's our title variable, and then we'll be able to throw this title variable in the H1. And so now when we click delete, it says delete movie inception, and we're doing well there. And the next thing to do is to wire up an event handler for this delete button. That's a little unique, how we're going to wire this up. And so here's my delete button, and I'm going to say @onClick. So that's not a JavaScript onClick. This is going to trigger the C# onClick. That's why you put that @ symbol in front of it. And our method name will be @confirm delete async. And so we need to write this method as a private async method, confirm delete async. Now that makes that happy. And I need to write my logic inside of my client. My client is my movies client. So let's go to movies client. We need to write the delete method inside of movies client. And so this will be public async task delete movie async. We take in an ID, and this will return await. Let's make sure our route is correct. This is a delete async, so it's, of course, it's going to call our delete post put delete. So it's /movies/ID is our backend route. So /movies/ID. So when you call this method, you just got to pass in the ID of the movie you want to delete. So there's the method delete movie async that we call here on this button click, confirm delete async. We're going to call our client delete movies async, pass in the movie ID, and navigate to home. And I think that'll work. Pass in the ID. And let's save, navigate to home. So now we have the event handler, and let's test. Of course, new movie 113 is the one I want to delete, and it is gone. And so there is our working delete operation. Just looking at the time, 30 minutes. Demonstrated at the end of this full stack CRUD with Blazor and a Restful API on the back end. And so I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for following along.